So welcome to Saving Our Cinema, Securing Our Future. I'm really happy that we have so many fabulous women on the stage, fabulous women and fabulous venues. Really interested to hear about everything that they've achieved in an area that I think so many people are kind of, and it's kind of always really challenging. So it's great to hear about people's experiences. So I'm going to hand over to Mimi from Strand Arts Centre, who's going to chair this session.
Thank you. Thanks, Catherine, and a big thanks to all of you for coming and making the last session here today. We're going to try and make it as informal and light as possible, so you don't get the beer itch halfway through. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a presentation about our experience at the Strand, and I'm delighted to be joined by Claire and Wendy. Each of our three projects are very different, and I suppose that is the nature of all capital projects. You will never get to the same, and being very conscious of that, then we want to keep it relatively high level, and then get into a discussion and invite loads of questions from yourselves, because we want to make sure that what we give you is relevant and useful. We don't get too caught up in the nitty-gritty of our own personal experiences. So just to start off and tell you a wee bit about the Strand Arts Centre. We are Belfast based, so I haven't come too far today. So the Strand is a 1935 Art Deco picture house. We set up the Strand as an art centre in 2012, started trading 2013, because the Strand as a commercial cinema at that point had folded and handed the keys back to the landlord. So we really created a multi-purpose art space in order to keep the space alive and to try and keep it animated, and because it wasn't listed, to prevent what we felt would be the alternative, which would be a redevelopment for housing or something more economically viable. So we got it up and running, but we're very conscious from the very early stages that it was a building that needed some major capital investment. Loads of aspects to it were obsolete. Everything from still working in 35mm projection in 2013, not even having a website, no disability access, wiring, plumbing, everything was just sticking plasters all over the place. So whilst the physical need for major capital investment was pretty real from the off, we did actually decide that we needed a bit of space to ensure that there was demand and to create a viable organisation, show that there was potential for it to be sustainable, and to build a case. So we didn't really get started in terms of the capital project and pulling that together until 3 years after we had started the organisation itself, and that was very much a conscious decision. It allowed us time and space to do a lot of programming, piloting loads of different events, activities, increasing the amount of cultural film on our programme, and to really understand where the demand was, to get to know our audiences really well, to bring them on a journey in a really slow process so that they felt that they were very actively involved all the way. And our audience, we're very much a community cinema. We're based in what would be like an urban village. 37% of our patrons all live in walking distance. So it was always important to us that these people who were the fourth generation in their family coming and using the Strand were very actively involved in what we were doing, that they always felt up to speed with any changes that were being proposed, and that they realised that it was all being done with them at the centre of every decision. So just taking you through a bit of a visual on where we are and what our journey has been over the years to date. The building hadn't really changed much internally over its 89 years history. The one major change being from one screen where we would have had 1,170 people into a 4-screen cinema in 1989. And actually, the lovely goodwill that we had inherited whenever we took on the Strand was that at that point, whenever it was refurbished, I suppose, first time, with not a great attention to building control and fire regs, but with an enormous amount of local community support. So even though it was commercially owned, a commercial venture, it was done with the community at the heart. So we definitely can't claim to have established the love for the Strand. It was there, and really it's just very much our job to be the custodians of it and ensure that we don't in any way damage or jeopardise the relationship that our patrons have with the building. So when we were thinking about capital journeys today, we did a wee bit of a list of all of the ingredients that you might need for your journey. And I suppose we were trying to think about capital on any scale, depending on, you know, what your personal circumstances were. There was always going to be, at first and foremost, identifying that need and being able to articulate it is, I suppose, what's most important of all. Ensuring that you are leading with the outcomes that you're providing. You know, your need is not physically improving your wiring or whatever else. It's ensuring that you can provide the best technology to showcase the art in its best sense. So every time we sat down with our needs and developed our case statement, it was making sure that we were starting with the outcomes and working back to what then are the outputs that you needed. The case statement that we put together was done very much internally, looking at the values of what we as an organisation had. But I have to confess that depending on the funder or the politician or the policy, it was always slightly tweaked to showcase what their interests were in terms of support. And I suppose because we are multi-art form, our audience segments are very diverse. The objectives of our programme vary a lot as well. It gave us a lot of flexibility. In refurbishing the building, there are obviously economic benefits, there's regeneration benefits, there's environmental benefits, there's educational benefits. And so we were reframing our needs and outcomes depending on who the support was coming from. And support, I suppose, being that community focus right from the off, and ensuring that we were constantly engaging with all of our local community, our other sectors, politicians, and keeping them up to date and ensuring that they were always part of the journey. Strategic planning being another core ingredient. Within the strategic plans, you do fairly quickly develop a whole new language. There are economic appraisals for writing and feasibility studies and business cases and 5-year business plans and 10-year business plans. But having, I suppose, a big pot of data and core information that you can paste into various formats depending on which funder requires which particular strategic plan is very useful. And of course, in developing these, there's a lot of expertise needed. There's expertise needed across the physical construction and knowing how that process has to work, expertise around funding, lobbying, and change making. We built up our board 2 or 3 times over the process of delivering our capital project, populating it with people who had all of that experience. But we also did an enormous amount of due diligence and speaking to people who'd been there before. And we were overwhelmed with the generosity and the openness and transparency of everybody that we spoke to. We looked particularly at arts venues, multi-arts venues that had film and cinema at its core, and particularly at venues that had cafes. and we have spreadsheets on the ratio of footfall between art forms, the average spend in each cafe, as many different, datas and segments that we could, and we use those then to make our own projections. And whilst that sounds very scientific, there's still a lot of guesswork in there, and we're still quite conscious that no two arts venues are the same, no two local demographics are the same, but it certainly at least gave us a lot of reassurance and lots of advice on things to do and more important things not to do. Fundraising, obviously another area that never stops. So having a wee look at our timeline, and not to scare anybody, but we did start in October 2016. You probably can't read this tiny writing, and you wouldn't want to anyway, but that was really our starting point in terms of writing our economic appraisal, developing some concept drawings. And actually there's an awful lot to be said about fake it till you make it. At that starting point, we were putting some relatively seed funding towards an architect to basically look at a vision. It was very high level stuff, but people, funders and community groups that we were working with and potential end users needed a physical sort of example of what the vision was or how it could look. They needed it to look architecturally possible, plausible, and we knew that we needed to package up a promise to people that they could get behind. Over the years, there was small pots of funding and the odd big pot of funding, and definitely, a couple of steps back. That's 8 years takes us to today, and our tender was due in today, actually extended to next Friday. So I suppose right up until our starting point was an 8-year period of gestation. Now, there are definitely efficiencies that could have happened along the way, perhaps no pandemic, and we've only had government for 2 of those 8 years in Northern Ireland. But at the end of the day, it's still a long slog, and there's never going to be a straight line. And if you ask a very naive version of me in 2016, how long might it take? I would have said to you, oh, well, they said it would be 7 years, and they said it might be 6 years, but we are an open goal here. Every policy says we need arts venues in the east of the city. Every politician says this is what we want. Every community group supports us. All the artists need space and a place. We have everything. This is too easy. It's going to happen. Give us a couple of years. So yes, I've eaten a lot of humble pie over the last 8 years. But hopefully it will be worth it. I have absolutely no doubt that this is not the end of the road. We will have plenty more challenges through the course of construction, and obviously we will just be beginning, and I have been quizzing Wendy and Claire a lot on what happens next. Obviously throughout our period of closure there's going to be enormous amounts of organisational change, a lot of preparing new policies and procedures, recruitment processes, staff training, and throughout that period we've got to hold on to that audience whilst we are out of our building. We've opened a pop-up in a local shopping centre, so we've still got some high street presence, a small screening room in there, but that's not going to turn over our 50,000+ people a year, so we've got to work really hard on our social media campaigning and getting out to our various stakeholders. So yeah, watch this space. There'll be a part 2 at some point. But so that's us in a nutshell. Wendy will be able to give you a slightly longer story because she is out the other side. And I'll welcome her to the stage.
Hi, it's it's really great to be here again, and I think I have been to different iterations of different sector events over the years while talking about this project, and it's really nice to finally come back having done it, because you do for quite a long time feel like a massive fraud who's just like, yeah, we're going to build a building, and I think in the time that we've been working on the Picture House project, I know of a number of other cinemas that have built second screens quicker and for less. The many joys of working with a heritage building. I'm going to briefly talk about kind of how we did develop the project and kind of how we got to, and yes, this is us now. We are open again. We reopened in the very end of June last year, so we've done a little bit more than a year, which is exciting. So just a little bit about us in the first place. The Picture House is a Grade 2 listed cinema, opened in 1914, November 1914, sort of a great time for cinema in some weird way. We're a single screen cinema, or we were a single screen cinema with an original capacity of over 560, which reduced down to 275 in the 10 years up to our closure. Pre-renovation, we were open 7 days a week, 364 days a year. We were at that point working with an average capacity of around 17 to 19%, so we were a large space, we were working pretty hard. It felt like we were having good numbers, but we had a lot of potential still. We had a strong programme combining new releases. We were first run cinema, but we also did a lot of work off date and had a strong rep programme. We also were doing an increasing amount of collaborative working with a wide range of kind of community, cultural, organisational partners. We're also kind of located, I think it's useful to know, outside of Leeds City Centre in the very dense kind of Hyde Park area, which is just north of the city. It's in a really interesting area where 57% of our local catchment is aged under 25. We're really near 3 universities, but there's also kind of lots of interesting kind of overlapping communities with contrasting needs, but makes it really fun as a cinema. That's us, the little red bit. Now, I think into a little bit more detail, so cause I think context does help you understand. I think, as Mimi said, every single cinema project is different, but also every single cinema is different. And I think whilst similarly, like on our journey, it was really helpful to look to other cinema projects, we spoke with lots of the venues who've gone down this route. We also looked to places like Chapter as kind of models of what's possible, but at the same time, our unique circumstances, and I think everyone's unique circumstances, mean that your opportunities and your challenges are a little bit different. I think for the Picture House it's useful to understand we're part of a larger charity called Leeds Heritage Theatres, which comprises of 2 theatres, an opera house and a music hall, and also the Picture House. We joined that group in the 1990s following a community campaign by our Friends of group to save the Picture House. So in theory we were saved in the 1990s, which wasn't quite right. I think at that time when we moved into that charity, and I'll say that that's one, it's not an MPO. At the point where we kind of closed for COVID, 99% of our organisation income was based on tickets across the 3 secondary sales. So we had a very small amount of kind of grant funding supporting really distinct parts of our programme, but nothing kind of supporting our core infrastructure. But when the Picture House was put into that organisation, into that charity, there was it was bought by the council and moved in there. And there was no forward plan for its maintenance, management of the asset, which already at that point was 80 years old, so not getting any younger. There was also no forward plan either by the council or the charity which took us on for a kind of an understanding of the cultural potential of the Picture House. We were just the strange little cinema sibling who kind of sat out of the city centre, kind of out of sight, out of mind. So long as we didn't burn down, we didn't kill anyone, which we didn't. We were kind of left to do our thing, because I think the other venues were, they're magnificent. One's an opera house, it was quite grand. I mean, literally the grand. I think they are the kind of focus points within the charity. So we were just this nice little side thing, which meant I think certainly from the point I took over. So I started working at the Picture House 21 years ago, and I became manager about 17 years ago when I was 23, which is a ridiculous age to kind of give a cinema business to someone, and an art student. And I think while I'm very grateful for that now, at the time it was a testament to how little the management kind of charity kind of thought about the Picture House. There wasn't really even an investment in that kind of staffing kind of consideration. It was just, it's okay, she's fine. But it did mean that I had a lot of freedom in those kind of years to learn what was possible with the Picture House, to figure out how to be a cinema manager, which was really great, lots of fun. Made some mistakes, but also did learn from some of them. I think in that period, sort of over a decade, we managed to really increase our audiences. We started working on that kind of that sort of more collaborative model of programming, expanded what we were doing. I think there was a massive amount of love for the Picture House, but when I took over, we weren't necessarily very integrated into the city or into our community. It was more that we were kind of beloved but perhaps not utilised, and that was reflected in audiences, where we were having our annual audiences around the mid-2000s were about 30,000 a year. When we closed pre-renovation, they were up to about 52 to 55, so we'd really kind of increased use of the building. And it was beautiful. It was a really lovely space that was also falling apart, and I think that will get me on to my next bit, which is why we did a big renovation project, because I think, as I said, we had shown kind of increased love for the place, we built up numbers, but we also had fundamentally not been able to resolve any of the core problems, which included the fabric of the building. We also had an unsustainable business model. We couldn't make enough money to cover the costs of a single screen cinema that was falling apart, despite a lot of love and a lot of attention to it. And we also couldn't meet the growing needs of a cinema business, so staffing costs were going up, health and safety costs. We were trying to be safe, which was really expensive. Trying to keep up with like modern legislation, and I think that's it. Like we were, designed and opened in 1914, where there was a completely different understanding about what these things could be or what was needed. So I think when we went into our centenary in 2014, we were really thinking then that we had a team around us in the cinema who had a lot of love for the place, had gone on this journey with me where we'd been working with the space and learning a lot, but we also had a reasonable sense of what the need was. So we decided that in order to reasonably secure the cinema for potentially another 100 years, because it's nice to kind of think big, we needed something quite ambitious. So we started this capital project, which was looking at trying to find ways to critically renew and conserve and celebrate our rich heritage, offer a comfortable, high quality and fully accessible environment for audiences, broaden and diversify our programme across film and heritage-based activities, and better serve our wide and diverse community, providing better facilities and more activities for local people. Critically, how we were doing this was by adding in an extension, which would allow us to unlock the potential of the original building. At the same time, we did do a lot to also upgrade all of the fabric of the space. We removed the asbestos, we upgraded the electrics, the heating, every single bit of the building was touched. But critically, kind of adding extra spaces allowed us to sort of also look at how we would address the need in terms of the business model. So I won't talk a lot about the actual kind of capital because I think you've probably heard me talk about it before. There's also a massive amount of information online about what we've done at the Picture House. If people have questions, do ask. But I'll try and be kind of succinct so we can maybe move on to questions. But we did, so on the left is the original Picture House, and then this section on the right, which you can see highlighted, is essentially what I like to think of as a backpack that we added on, which allowed us to kind of increase the potential of the original building. That gave us an extension which had a kind of cafe within it, internal seating area, an accessible lift to take you down into the second screen, a small community space, and then also down in the basement this second auditorium, 51 seats, which would functionally allow us to kind of really expand our programming capacity, but also allow us to do that twist in terms of the business model. So as I say, we did manage to actually do all of this. We reopened, I'm laughing because sometimes it is surprising to me. We reopened last summer, which is really wonderful. As is the kind of, the way the entire project was gone, the second screen opened a little bit later because of some fun with water at the 11th hour. But now that's working and it's really wonderful. I think now I'll just briefly touch on, so Mimi really helpfully shared her timeline for the Strand, and I thought it might be useful to just reflect back on the Picture House's one. So this is the timeline that we submitted with our original Heritage Fund application. So I think in that project we worked on the feasibility study from 2015 to 2016. We submitted to the Heritage Fund in 2016 and received a first round pass. We thought we'd be able to work through the development phase, do all the match funding, do all the design development, and hopefully get back open in 2019, which was wrong. So this is kind of how it actually went. So we did end up adding 3 and a bit years to that timeline. So we more or less doubled the timeline that we had. I think there's some really high level things that impacted that. Obviously COVID, that added a year to our kind of our scheme, where we were just stuck in an ether because the funding for the entire organisation became really precarious. We basically had to restate the need for everything. So that delayed us by a year, and then critically we were meant to be on site for 1 year and we ended up being on site for 2, because heritage buildings can be a lot harder than you think. And we found on site there were some things that we knew would be really sticky, other things that we didn't, which surprised us, like the front of the building was ever so slightly leaning forward and was made of stone. So you don't want stone to nearly fall off. But we did get through it, and as I say, we reopened last year, and I think that first kind of year of us being back open, we had again sort of some aims of what we wanted to achieve. We were wanting to kind of rebuild our audiences sustainably and in line with our audience development goals, re-establish our industry connections and try to form some new ones, ensure the Picture House was a significant venue in the north for filmmaker previews and tours, try and be a leader in the sector. That doesn't mean kind of being, I think I was saying to some colleagues recently, it doesn't mean being the best or kind of like being like a standout, it's just being a good, honest, helpful kind of example that hopefully is useful to other people. But then I think critically, and I have this as the last one, but it's really the most important one, I wanted to kind of go back in last year and work out what do our community actually need right now, because I think it was very strange going through this capital refurbishment project during COVID and during kind of everything that happened in that period. And whilst we were still doing a lot during that time, we delivered over 400 screenings whilst we were closed in other kind of venues in the city. We also did lots of work online, digital engagement activities. We supported kind of activities in other screenings, other festivals. We kept ourselves busy, but at the same time that's fundamentally different to being a building that is open for your community in a time of crisis. So I think I was really aware that we had a whole scale of relearning to do. And I think in terms of how we did about that, there's some kind of numbers that can help us understand our success or failure, as the case may be. So in our first 12 months, we had just under 2,000 public performances, 350 unique films. We sold over 83,000 tickets, and then another 8,000 people came through the doors for talks, tours, heritage activities, private hires, just to sort of nosy, use the toilet, it's valuable. So there was a strong kind of footfall, and I think that was incredibly encouraging. We had a significant number of parts of the programme which had some kind of enhanced events, whether that was craft activities, talks, panel discussions, musical elements, food, lots of that. Just lots of different things that kind of brought this whole extra energy into that first year. And more than 80 of those screens were delivered with some kind of collaborative element with an external partner. We also had really great stats, I'm going to try and speed up a wee bit. We did well in terms of improving our access provision, recognising that was one of the core things, as much as we had added ramped access at the front, an accessible toilet, the lift, improved kind of, you know, awareness like better lighting, better sound, all of these things that had an impact on audience needs. We also massively expanded our accessible performance programme. And I think we have, since we got back open, seen incredible feedback from audiences about those kind of elements to what we've done. These are just some of the really lovely comments we have had from people since we got back in, and I think it has been really amazing. I think Mimi's talked about kind of, you do worry, it's terrifying. Like when we first talked about the scheme, we were scared, absolutely shitless about being closed for 12 months because it felt like we will lose our audience, and then we were closed for 3 years, so it was petrifying. So it was really amazing when we came back in, and not only do we have these like headline figures that say people came and they enjoyed it and they like us, they still like us. They also kind of showed us and shared kind of really thoughtful feedback, but also constructive at times, because there was also so much learning to do in this period, which will take me on. I think I also have to acknowledge obviously the challenges. So I think cost escalation is really kind of critical. I think in the really detailed timeline I had about what actually happened, you might have noticed on the capital project we ended up having to apply for additional support from the National Heritage Fund twice. Capital projects, they end up costing more. It's really difficult. Heritage buildings pull up surprises no matter what your contingency is. it's never quite enough. And I think when you discover things like unsecure parts of the building, particularly difficult issues to solve, it takes time, fees, all of these things kind of escalate really quickly. And then that has a knock-on effect, because obviously it means that we're carrying some of that, the Picture House is carrying some of that deficit now going forwards. But I think then critically, one of the challenges we had as well is the fact that our business model that we designed pre-renovation, and I think the one that we initially designed in 2016 to support the application, we then kept looking at obviously constantly through this whole period. But then going back in, it has to be looked at again, because all of our costs have gone up, not just relative to the building, but also staffing and everything. The world has changed slightly since we closed, and I think that's a significant thing. I think we've also changed the release landscape and the moving ideas about what a sure thing kind of looks like. I think I've been programming for a long time, and it's really difficult to accept that I just don't, the things I knew before aren't really useful things now, or not useful enough. There's a lot of relearning there to do. Part of that, there's an increased need for one-off events in the programme for income and engagement reasons, but there's significant capacity needs associated with that. And then snagging, I think this is something we were talking about previously before. I think whilst we're doing all of this learning this past year about like how to deliver the business model, how it needs to change and evolve, we're also at the same time still coming off a capital project, still snagging, still trying to figure out not just the practicalities of relearning how to use this space, but also literally trying to still fix some things that the builders didn't get quite right. A weird leak here, or an odd sound there. It takes kind of time to investigate. So you are still, I think, working through this building project long after everyone else imagines you've put it to bed. We only just kind of finally signed that off with our contractors, and that's more than 12 months later. And then I think also for us, like really specific challenges, like we've had changing leadership in that time, both at board level and senior leadership, like our CEO kind of moved on. There was about 18 months where I didn't have a very active CEO above me supporting. And then I think the final thing, which is sort of the biggest thing, the biggest challenge that I'm currently trying to figure through is this difficult balance between capacity, ambition, opportunity and need. And I think you're constantly trying to figure out what is the right thing to do, what's the thing I want to do, what am I excited to do, what do people need me to do. And I think that's something that every member of the team struggles with in a different way, and it's really difficult to communicate it to partners and audiences. But it's also just something where there is a right answer, we just need to kind of keep working and figuring out, and that's where we're in at the moment, a strange sweet spot of figuring out the next bit, because there is a next bit. And I think the difficult thing about capital projects is for a long time they feel like the absolute thing, like I just need to build this building, and then it's done, and actually there's this thing because unless you quit and move on, which is no fun, you then have to actually do this other rebuilding, which is around what a cinema can be. And I think this is where we're at next. So at the moment we are looking at, and this is what I see the next 5 years being about, stabilising the business plan, trying to implement a management and maintenance plan that keeps on top of the asset, because we can't do this again in 10 years' time. Recentering the audience development strategy, because everything should connect into that. And then really critically figuring out a really sustainable working practice for your team, because I think all of the above stuff only works if people aren't falling down. And it's difficult because all of these things are really hard. But once you do come off a capital project, I think you do feel a little bit like, well, I built a building and I didn't build a building, but you feel like you did. So trying to figure out how to stabilise a business plan, that should be easy, I think. That's kind of I guess like an exciting energy you get for the next bit, which leads us on.
This doesn't really work for the video, but can I just get a show of hands? Has anybody been to chapter? Okay, great. Has anybody, those people who put their hands up, have you been to chapter before 2009? Oh, okay, hello. This was chapter about 100 years ago, well, over 100 years ago, so it was a school. And so it's very different to the two projects we're talking about. I mean, these are both exciting places, but the chapter was never intended to be a cinema or a theatre or any of those things. It was a school, and in fact, so Olivia Newton-John's dad went there. She popped in, genuinely did when I was on a shift. She's like, that's Olivia Newton-John. So her dad went there, John Toshak, who you might know from Real Madrid or football manager of Wales. He went there, and Kev Hole, who still works on the bar. He was one of the last years when it was sort of Canton High School. So he roadied for Status Quo. That's his thing. But yeah, so we still have somebody who sort of did go to it when it was a school. But then in the 60s, it just got abandoned. They sort of built another building, and some artists had their eyes on it. So yeah, so what is Chapter? What is it? Because so this sort of group of artists, you've got kind of Mick Flood, Christine Kinsey, and Brian Jones. They made case for the fact that Cardiff needed an arts centre, and it's really strange to imagine it that there just wasn't an arts centre. There was obviously community centres, and down in Cardiff Bay, what was Tiger Bay, there was some really really brilliant stuff going on, but there was nowhere for artists to work, and that's why it's really different to these two actually, because what Chapter was, it was a building that was essentially just kind of squatted by artists and just turned into something. And so it's always been, Chapters as a project, it's always been kind of like, oh, we need this, oh okay, we'll get this equipment in and we'll do that because we're going to do this sort of art now. There was people who they were very aware that some of the artists were mothers and had childcare responsibilities, this being the 70s, and not thought that men need to do childcare. So it was like, right, okay, so we'll get a creche in. And people are hungry, okay, we'll put a cafe in, we'll just do some sort of veggie scran, and that'll be what people eat. The audience wasn't thought of at the start, whereas these two other places, it's like, this is a presentation of something. This is Chapter was always kind of meant to be for artists to work, and so thinking about the audience very much came came second, just because of necessity. So that's kind of what it was. So this kind of Chapter, what is it? This was for the sort of the audience around Chapter in Canton. Canton was very working class area, and it was suddenly like, what are they doing with the school? What's going on at the school? There's these weirdos at the school doing something. So that was what Chapter was. This weird place, and so I think a lot of it was, and it's this strange idea, isn't it, of like, oh, that's cool, isn't it? Or what cool thing are they doing over there? And it's, so John Ronson talks about, because he's from Cardiff, about how when he was growing up in the 80s, it was the only place he felt safe. And I love that. It's really, really special to me to hear stuff like that. And other people say it to me as well, but the reason that they felt safe there is because it was just, nobody knew what it was. It was cool. It was for weirdos, So in the 90s, in the sort of the cinema actually wasn't built. Cinema 1 wasn't built until the 80s, till 88. But we did have Cinema 2. This is a picture of Cinema 2. Again, and what happened? How was that created? So Newport Film School in the 70s was a real force. And then in the early 80s as well, the television workshop, the Chapter television workshop. There was there was an awful lot of stuff going on that people wanted to document and talk about. So in the Welsh Valleys, obviously all the strikes were happening, miners' strikes in sort of 84. People, just wanted to document it and make film about it. So there's a collective called Red Flannel, who were doing great things and kind of showing them and talking about them. It was always a place to make work, show work, talk about work. So that whole kind of ecosystem of things was happening in Chapter. I think also in the 80s we had an influx of animators as well that came to Cardiff, because the creation of Espedarec, of S4C, we talk about it quite a lot. It's kind of a strange thing that suddenly there was this money that wasn't there before for Welsh TV, and there was an animator on the board of S4C. So he was like, let's fund animation then. Of course, nobody else in the world was at the time. So loads of people started moving to Cardiff. So there's Joanna Quinn, who's won Oscars and BAFTAs and lovely things. She's still got a studio in Chapter. She just always worked from her studio there. And so, like I said, this was a place, that's what we did. That's what Chapter was, that's what it was. So this is from the kind of 90s, you can tell, 'cause it's all sexy, dark photography from the 90s. Yeah, so it's like, there was a bit of sort of slight thinking about the audience then. It's like, okay, people are actually coming into our building. So there started to be tweaks. There was an official cafe with tables and things like that. People aren't just sitting, like, grabbing a seat and, like, eating somewhere. So like I said, they started to think about the audience really in the 80s or the 90s. This is how it was when I first got there. So I've been at Chapter for 20 years almost, which is really weird. It makes me feel very old. And I started working on the bar when I was doing other art things and just got a bar job. And I think it's useful to talk about this and think about this kind of thing. Sort of the reason I'm talking about this history is because these things happen to Chapter. They just kind of happen to Chapter. It just kind of grows based on people. And but then I think, and we were I think there was sort of external forces, like Wales became devolved in the late 90s, and I think they kind of wanted something. They wanted us to tidy up a bit because we were Cardiff's Arts Centre. So they did want us to think a bit more strategically and not just be the place where things get set on fire and like not the building, but like there's an infamous story of the fire lake. This is very, very much, I mean, the first picture, it's a school on a normal street, and there was, like, they cleared out some of the plants and just had a lake of fire there for a week as part of a performance thing. And so all these strange things that was happening in Chapter, it was like, actually, can you tidy up a bit and look a bit tidier as a building? And so all this kind of started to happen, and then in 2008, we started the big redevelopment, and it was really, really huge, and I don't think we really realised at the time. We knew that the building was creaking and it needed things doing to it, so we kind of took it on our stride again. It's like, oh yeah, Chapter's changing again, but actually this did make a huge change. So this is what Chapter was like when it reopened in 2009. So very, very different, great big open space. I mean, what you can't see is like all the community gardens, and that's sort of like, there's nothing there at the moment. But as you can see, it was just like, this is now a purpose-built building for audiences. And the accessibility as well, it was completely changed. So there's no good photos of Chapter from the 90s or early 2000s, apart from on my phone, basically, or early camera phones or something that I've got. There's, where the cafe bar was, it was like where those pillars are, that was the outside, and so the cafe bar was pretty much just in this small space that you see in the front there, and that's all it was. And the bar was along one wall, and the cafe was just on the end. And so what the capital build was completely create this social space that wasn't there before, or expand it out. And so it was, like I say, it gets very busy. Like, this is it more sort of today. This is from a few months ago. But so you can see how, like, that, just changing that made it so much more accessible in terms of, like, sort of, just getting people in, looking more open. But what happened, just going back to that one, what happened was that, I mean, when this space isn't as busy as that, because obviously there's people sat on the floor and all sorts, is that Chapter's character changed, and this is one of the things that I'd sort of like to talk about a little bit. I think is like, this is my learning from like doing this capital bid, is our character changed quite a lot when this happened. Before, when we were the cool space, the cool weird space that nobody knows whether it's there or not, and there's weirdos in there, it had a certain audience. And when this happened, it was amazing. We increased our footprint by 30%, like our actual base of where Chapter was, but the footfall of the people coming in increased by like 60%. So it was unexpected. Like, I mean, acoustic wise, we had to change loads of stuff. All those black things up there, we had to like suddenly put in all this acoustic work because there was far more people coming in than we were expecting. So you're thinking, oh, this is amazing! Wow, well done, great success. I'm going to sit down. That's the end of my presentation. But it's not, is it? It's because that brought like more challenges we weren't expecting about our audience changing and what they were expecting from us. So around that time, so we changed our cinema programme as well, because like I said, I've been saying all along, we are mixed arts. So cinema is just one thing of what we do. And so our cinema programme changed. We became an on-date venue. And again, people were pleased, what a great thing. But then it's like more expectations, because all the things we were doing before, in terms of people like, conceiving a project, filming a project there, using our equipment and showing the project and talking about the project, that's so key to what we do. But then suddenly we didn't have as much space to do that with, because we were, programming on date, and we have an audience to serve, and we have an audience that expects a certain type of programme that comes with that. And so all these things were, I think, when we were planning the big redevelopment project in 2009, it wasn't really thought through. We were just thinking more, and we weren't thinking who and why. That wasn't really what the aim was. All the funding was like, oh, we're going to get so many more people, it's going to be great, it's really going to be so sustainable. And we were, before COVID, it was 85% of our budget for the year was just based on the cafe bar, because it was so successful. And it was just, it was amazing. How fantastic, you think? Which it is, obviously it is, but it does come with a completely different set of expectations. Talk about community. This is kind of, again, this is a bit more what it looks like now, with the community garden. And we kind of went into the pandemic in a little bit of an existential crisis. So we're just gonna just the cinemas now. I forgot to show you these slides. This is Cinema 1. This is when I was on stage with Mark Jenkin, and Cinema 2. This is how it looks now, not with a little tissue projector on the table like it was in the 70s. So this is an abandoned project. This is because we came out of 2009 and everybody just thought, oh wow, we're doing so well. We need to do more straight away. Like, we were sort of barreling into another project. And so there was another project immediately that started up. So as you can see, increasing the footfall again by like another 30%. So the grey building here, that's the studios. It's called Market House. And so it was sort of talking about utilising that. And then the pink ones, they're the sort of the new bits. So it's like, yeah, great, we'll do this. But things had started to fracture a little bit in terms of partnerships in our community. And it was one of those things that was kind of like quick and slow at the same time. People had started to complain about the airport, hangar stuff, and all this kind of thing, and like feeling not as welcome there anymore. And we were like, oh yeah, whatever, we're doing really well, never mind. And then I think with the pandemic, it really brought home to us what we were, what we should be, and that's more this. It is more like it's our community gardens, it's working with our community more, and actually not losing sight of what we had at the beginning, which is being a place where people can come to use us and conceive work in chapter and make work in chapter. It's not just about being like, oh yes, we're just for artists and we're not for audiences, but it's how do we actually combine those things? How do we make those things work? Because it's, we're not a multiplex. We can't just keep adding screens. So what we're doing at the moment is we're conceiving. I haven't got any plans, but I've sort of got my sort of impression of what it is. So the next stage now, we've abandoned another great big capital project. So that was abandoned in 2015, between 2015 and 17. It's hazy on various versions of it. But we're definitely not going to do a capital project now, and we're certainly not because there's no funding anymore. But this actually has kind of been something that's out of this challenge is something really good has come. Is that we're thinking more about doing things a little bit more sort of piecemeal and a little bit more kind of carefully. So this space, the studio space, will become our kind of flexible space, and we have a proper screen in it as well. So we can use it for more things. It'll be a more accessible space. And because we're planning it now and we're really talking to our community, it does make it just a lot better for us and for our sustainable future, rather than just like sustainability being the amounts of people, but sustainability being like who is coming and why are they coming. We had a festival called Death Gathering a couple of weeks ago, and we did something with it. Actually, we had a lot of deaf people coming in. We did live BSL interpreted films. And even just from that one event, it'd be like, oh, we definitely need a spot, making sure on the side of the screen, not just in the middle where we put the Q&As, It needs somebody, needs there, it needs a certain amount of lighting. We sort of learnt so much. And a monitor, being able to have a monitor there so the signer can watch the film whilst they're doing it. So all these things are like, brilliant, okay, can add that into the plan. So it's really talking properly to our, when you say stakeholders aren't just, funders. That's how we sort of often think about this. Stakeholders are our community. It's all the people on our doorstep as well, and how they might use the building. So it is bringing those people back in rather than as customers and servicing them. It's like talking to them. It's that dialogue. So that's where we are. I'm going to stop talking because we really want to have a talk with you guys and we want to be useful. So I'm going to go back to that one because I like that one.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to ask a couple of questions, and then Catherine's also going to let me know if anybody has put any questions for them mentee, which is slightly terrifying because that's the one where you don't have to tell us who you are asking all the tricky questions. But then we'll also do a roving mic as well. So I have to thank both of you guys who've given me enormous amounts of information and help and support over the years, never mind in recent months. I thought it was really interesting to hear how many different challenges that we've all experienced and different challenges coming at different stages. So it's a fairly negative start to ask, but what would you say would have been I'm going to start with Wendy, your biggest challenge throughout the course of your project?
So many great ones to choose from. But I think the one that's probably personally I found hardest is the need to constantly over 10 years now advocate for the need for the project and the value of the picture house. And I think when you totally fall in love with a venue and a community and see how important it is, it's really strange to kind of then spend a really protracted period trying to constantly explain to people not just why a project like this would help that venue and help that community, but also kind of critically to outside people to try and explain why it's worth the investment in the first place. And I think it's something where at so many different points, I actually, I feel like the Picture House team were on board from the get-go. The wider organisational one wasn't, I would say. And then I think it meant that from the earliest stages, we had to bring along internal stakeholders as well as funders, council, all of these kind of other people who have really different relationships to the building and the community. And it's just ongoing. Like I was thinking, even on site, like I remember trying to persuade our contractors that the project was of value whilst they're building the building. And it's just a bit heartbreaking.
Claire?
Like I said, the biggest challenge was coming back, and finding the audience changing, because it's like, it was great, there was all this excitement at first, there was, but then seeing that, it was like I said, the slow ebb of these people aren't coming, and ask them why they're not coming in. It's like, it's just a big echoey place now. It doesn't feel like for us, and so and being like, but we've done it now. That's it. We've spent the money, and that's and so that was the biggest challenge for us was, apart from the very obvious things about snagging, we were talking about having a big conversation about snagging issues and things like that, because everybody thinks it's over when you've opened the doors and think, there we go, you've finished all the build, there's nothing else to do, and you're like, if only you could see behind the scenes where we've just kind of put a lick of paint on things and we're open because we have to open now because we're losing money, and then there's all behind the scenes, there's all these things, there's a weird shelf that still really annoys me in the cafe bar because it's never been fixed. Things like that. So
that's a good word of warning, because I would say one of my biggest challenges at the Strand and for all of our team is that for all those years now that we've been developing the project, you are running two horses at the same time. And so you're doing your day job, you're operating an art centre, you're open 364 days of the year, and yet you're also fundraising for a capital project, and you're trying to do that design development piece as well. So to know that there still will be 2 horses going when the building opens is probably quite good to bear in mind a wee bit as well.
And just say we stayed open throughout. Like we had one cinema because we gave a lick of paint to cinema 1, so we kept cinema 2 open for a bit whilst that happened, and that was closed. So it was just new carpets, new seats, like not even new seating properly, just new seating covers. You know, it was just like very much a lick of paint. And then so cinema 1 wasn't really changed. Cinema 2 was completely gutted and changed. And so we operated in the what's now going to be this flexible space. That was our kind of cafe bar that held like 100 people, and now we can hold 1,000. So it was like, so we had a very different experience. We stayed open throughout, and that was challenging for different reasons. Yeah.
Okay. One more question before we see what everybody else wants to know, and we're going to put some sunshine on this topic because I'm quite aware that there's a lot of challenges being raised, but there are definitely moments on the journey where there are wins. So I want to know what your wins were. What moments do you look back and go, yes, we're getting it right, or it's going to happen, or people appreciate it?
I think it's, for me, there was early ones like securing financial support for the project. I think is a really obvious, tangible one, because I think in that first stage when we were first bidding into the Heritage Fund, like we didn't have the support of, say, our local council. Our board just kind of let us do it rather than support it. So it felt like we had to do something quite extreme in order to get people to get on board. But once they were on board, it was really exciting. But then I think more recently, just literally seeing audience members come back in and seeing really good events work and feeling like it was like just worth it. It's just like such an incredible win. It's just really beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, for us it was I think just doing this work, like the preparation of it, it gave at the time a chance to sort of reflect. And again, we reflected at the time, but reflect on the building and the history rather than the audiences, which was interesting. But yeah, it's just the being able to sort of relaunch it, and knowing that people have been really kind of rooting for us all that time, and then finding that it's like, and it's open, it's shining. There was, this big open space suddenly, and all the light. I mean, it still really excites me every single summer when we get to open it. We've got concertina doors at the back where the garden is, and so you get to open up the concertina doors, and there's all this like light and air floods in, and it's like, oh my goodness, this was impossible. It's just like little boxes, So just that, like, keep delighting in what you've done, I think, is really important.
I think I would say, we're not there yet, but the fact that the big funding wins are always obviously a complete delight, that you feel like it's actually going to happen. But one of our core funders is National Lottery Heritage Fund, and through them, Rosie here has done a lot of oral history collection and hearing the stories from your audience about how much it matters to them, and that it has mattered to the generations of their family that have gone before. I think that's the thing that really makes you feel like, yes, this is going to work, and this is much needed and much valued. We will add another 2 or 3 generations to that family enjoying this building.
Yeah, thanks very much. Really inspiring projects. One of the questions I had is, I guess it might be for Wendy, but is dealing with the heritage building. Did you have any issues about, what is a heritage building, and then you're dabbling about with it and adding things to it, and what were those kinds of issues?
Yeah, so I mean, we're lucky in that we're grade 2 listed, which is a really nice level of listing, because you can do more with it than anything kind of above that, but then at the same time there is a volume of really beautiful heritage to it. I think we were really lucky that Leeds City Council are very pro-access. I know that sounds really obvious, but I'm not sure all local authorities are. And I think whilst they are very sort of great in terms of heritage, they also sort of were our council who do support access over heritage, I would say, to the extent where we were able to kind of say so clearly that we cannot make this building accessible without significant interventions to the heritage. And they were like, yeah, of course, we get it. And then worked with us really carefully to figure out, right, what are what the interventions in terms of the heritage that need to happen, but without impacting the access as the priority need. And also fundamentally getting that it was more important to keep the picture house open, and that again, without significant intervention, we were not going to be a functioning heritage building in 5 years, 10 years time, we would be closed. So.
Yeah, I should say also, chapter is, we don't own chapter, most of it. That weird little grey bit, that's what we own. We have that, that's ours. The rest of it is on a peppercorn rent from Cardiff Council. So anything we do, we has to go through that. So that's the whole other sort of challenge. And there's still bits of the building we don't have, which is a bit strange. There's a little bit at the back, which is kind of like called Ticana, and that's owned by the council still and used by them. So we as much as we're like, oh yeah, we did this and it was great. It was like, oh my goodness, there was so many steps to get to that point where we were allowed to do that. And like I say, that's still, and it's a frustration at times, you're like, oh my goodness, if we could only get our hands on that bit, then we'd have another screen, or we'd have, so it's, because how was it in the Strand? Was it, do you own it outright? And
no, we have a long lease on it. We did try and talk the council into buying it for us, but they were not up for that. We have secured purchase option, so we have a phase 2 funding plan. But yes, and it's not listed, so we're in a quite fortunate position in terms of being able to do what we want and need. Now, obviously, heritage is one of our core charitable values, and Heritage Lottery, there as a funder, are able to also sense check what we're proposing and have a fairly strong seat at the table in terms of advocating for what they think needs to be protected. And we realise the value, the not just the architectural heritage, but that social history is very much a part of our identity, and we see them going hand in hand. So we want to protect that and bring that through as part of the project. I think there's a question.
Hello there, I'm going to try and keep the mic away because I've been coughing and spluttering. my name is Ross, and I was daft enough to buy a Category B listed church, and I'm currently developing it as a community arts venue. My question is a bit of a two-parter. So I've been listening to you, and thanks very much for delivering the information you have. But I hear you talking about your capital bids and, for example, the maintenance and management plans, and it can be a bit intimidating to hear it all. So my sort of first part of the question is, we're quite a small team. How do you know what you don't know? And the second part of that is, how do you find solutions to the gaps in your experience? Is that through a board, staff, partners? How do you do that? How did you overcome that?
We'll start with how do you know what you don't know? Funny, Wendy and I were talking about this yesterday. We all start with no knowledge, and so it's achievable. It's just filling those gaps and finding people who will share information with you. And we're so lucky in our sector, and that I think when you pick up the phone and meet people in functions like today, people are so giving. Nobody wants you to go through hoops and loops that they've been through. So, I think ask lots of questions, but start with that sort of evidence your need, get your case statement done, create that feasibility or business case, write your funding strategy. So it's a lot of paperwork, but a lot of it is reminding yourself and your team about the vision and about the why. The why is at the front of all of it, so it can also be very motivating going through all of that. Do you want to answer a question?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because for us, I mean, like with the 3 artists that kind of like led on sort of like having the building at first, each time there's been a build, a bit added to it, there's been a completely different financial situation in the world. And it's like, it's obvious that Cardiff needs an art centre. Okay, here's some money to start. I'm not saying it was easy as that. Obviously, it wasn't. But when we did the 2008 build, it was like, okay, very clear capital spend. a clear sort of national case, NPO case for this. And like right now, we do need to make changes, but there's not that many out there. The bid that the version that got abandoned in sort of like about 10 years ago, that was going to be a collaboration between different organisations, and that kind of fell apart. It sort of fractured out a little bit. One of the organisations changed fundamentally and things like that. So I think so we've sort of seen lots of different versions of what it is. I think if you've got any local collaborations, that's incredibly important. Like I said, there was all these artists that came together, but the reason why Chapter became a thing wasn't just an artist squat for years, is because there was an Everyman theatre, not cinemas. There was an Everyman theatre that started there, that still is in the building, and they still do a very, very successful programme every year. There was print studios, that there was lots and lots of different people all coming together. So I think that's really important. It's like, look at your local community. And this one, I mean, the flexible space, we found it's a vendor called Fidelity. So, but I mean, our fundraisers are just looking all the time. It's just like, nobody sort of says, oh, here's a list, here you go. You have to really just search it out, and sometimes you're lucky, and like having people who can write bids. We were talking about this earlier. It's like language of making a bid for things is just so opaque if you're new to it. So just seek out other people that have done it and just ask advice, and go to funders and kind of complain that like they should be making it easier to apply for this money. So it's it just comes in from lots of different places, and sometimes financing, like it's just taking a loan out. There's all sorts of amazing places that have started because people have just put money on their credit card. I'm going to buy a new digital projector, and that'll start off and get enough audiences just to get something else and get something else. So it's I think these days there's so many different places. You can't just be like, we're going to make a case and we're going to go and be an important place, which I think was always the assumption that I think previously we've sort of made in Chapter, which is a bit uncomfortable.
I guess I'd add that I think in terms of that going out and seeking knowledge, some of that includes just like really practically asking people if you can see their feasibility studies, like seeing as much documentation as you can. And I think when we were doing our round one pass, we also had some really great consultants at the right time. We met the right people, and some of them were friends who talked to us for free, and some of them were people we paid at the right points. Because sometimes you do just need like the right person at the right time. But lots of them also just shared with us examples. And I think when we did things like we wrote our activity plan, we did that off the back of just reading lots of other people's and seeing what other people have done, and we're really grateful that lots of people have been constantly generous with us. And then I think beyond that first learning of seeing it somewhere else, because over the process you end up doing these things quite a lot of times, so you rewrite your own feasibility study, you rewrite your own business plan like 10 times, and by the end you kind of know how to do it, or like a version of how to do it. So you do learn the skills, I think, as well. And it's okay to make some mistakes, even with old buildings. They're fine.
I think your other question about board is it's really important to try and get that governance structure right, and get expertise in and around your board. It's incredibly difficult to get it right, and it's taken us, quite a number of years to get into a structure where we really feel like our board is a really valuable asset of our organisation. I'm not sure if I said that a number of years ago, but it's not just about getting the right expertise around the table, it's ensuring that they know what the expectations is of them, how much time they're to give, whether they are a working board and have to deliver. And when you're a small organisation, you're starting out, really time is nearly more valuable to you than expertise quite often. So finding people who are either retired or for some reason have that passion in order to give you some hours and take some time off your plate to do some drafting or whatever it is something to give some consideration to.